Hey there folks, so today I'm going to walk you through a lick that I learned from recording of Scott VESTAL. I'm not sure if it's a Scott VESTAL lick per se. You really never know with some of this stuff if Scott played it first or maybe Bela or maybe Bill Keith, but I learned it from a recording of Scott VESTAL. So here's the lick I'm talking about. I just played it in that little example, but this is specifically the section that I mean. So what that is a lick that's going from G to C, and you can kind of tell because it starts on G. And then it ends on C. Pretty simple, but it's got kind of a nice sound to it. It really has that momentum from one chord to another, and it kind of grabs the ear. So just for an example, here's where Scott plays it in recording with David Parmley and Continental Divide on a really cool song called Wing and a Prayer, where he plays a lot of interesting stuff. Coming in on a wing and a prayer. So first things first, let's just look at what's actually happening with the lick, how to play it, and how I'm really thinking about it in terms of what it does to get from G to C. It's pretty much made up of just one roll pattern, which starts on the index finger, and it's all on the same strings for the most part. There's a little bit of a variation, but we're starting with index, thumb, index, middle. So it's a 4-note pattern on the 3rd, 4th, and 1st string. So we're going 3, 4, 3, 1. And we're just repeating that pattern with different shapes in our left hand. So it's pretty simple right hand wise, and that gives it some continuity, moving from one chord to another, but all the interesting harmonic stuff is happening over here. So what's happening there is that I'm keeping my ring finger on the 3rd fret of the 4th string, that note F, and then I'm playing this roll pattern with notes changing on the 3rd string for the most part. And with this lick, we can kind of just go with one roll pattern after another. So the first one goes like this. Then we do the same thing with our index finger on the 1st fret of the 3rd string, that G sharp. We move up one more fret with our middle finger on the 2nd fret of the 3rd string. And then this is where things change just a little bit. We're gonna do the same roll pattern, same fingers, just on the 2nd string instead of the 3rd string. So it's like this. Then, you guessed it, we land on C. So that's the whole lick. And real quick, just so you know, I'm going to show some of the examples on screen in Tablature, but some of the longer examples I'm going to leave out. But you can get the Tablature for every example that I play in this video at patreon.com/EliGilbertBanjo, which is where you can get all the bonus content that doesn't happen here on YouTube. Great way to support this channel, all that stuff, but it's also where you get all the rest of the Tablature that you don't see on screen. And of course, if you don't mind, do me a favor and subscribe to this channel and like this video, which is another huge way that you can help me make more of these videos. So if you do that, I really appreciate it. Anyway, that's the whole lick. If you want to go from G to C, then great. It'll work great every time. If you're in the key of G, going from the 1 chord to the 4 chord, G to C, then it's great. But if you're in the key of C, like I was at the beginning of this video, I was playing C, F, G, back to C, it still works great. It's the same chord relationship going from G to C no matter what. So if you ever come across that situation, this lick will work great. But the real point of this video is actually so much bigger than just that lick. You should totally learn that. If you come out of this video and all you do is learn how to play this lick and then you correctly use it going from G to C, then that actually is totally great. But in terms of studying music and trying to figure out the sounds you like, trying to figure out how to reproduce those sounds and play something that might feel original or like something that you came up with yourself, or whatever the many benefits of doing that would be, there's so much more that we can do beyond just playing those exact notes in that exact situation. And so in this case, with this lick, the name of the game is really that we're just trying to come up with different variations. And there isn't some really specific concrete way that we do that. A lot of it for me is just tinkering around with it. It's just trying different patterns, either in the right hand or the left hand, or trying it in different keys, seeing if I can do it up an octave, something like that. And there are no rules, we're just gonna try different things. So one of the first things I do is if I've got a lick that's kind of based around a repeating pattern, then I kind of know that I can change that repeating pattern and have a new repeating pattern, and it'll have a similar effect, right? So let's just think about what that roll pattern is. Starting on the index finger, we're going index, thumb, index, middle. Well, this could be simple and this could not sound particularly good, but what would happen if I reversed that? So instead of index, thumb, index, middle, I did index, middle, index, thumb. I have no idea if it's gonna work, but let's just see what happens. Okay, that's kind of interesting. It doesn't have the same effect, but what that makes me think of is that it would work really well in a different context. So let's say I was playing just kind of a bluegrassy sounding, thing like I played in the beginning. That original version of the lick really helps drive things forward. It's got a certain kind of momentum. This new version that I just played, it works, and it might be fine. It actually might be great, but I actually think it would work better in kind of a different rhythm feel. And it's just like kind of the reverse of the lick that we just played, but it really gives a different effect because the alternating between the third string and the fourth string creates a new effect. I'm kind of hearing this. It sounds a little more swingy to me, actually. So it actually worked maybe in a slower song or maybe like a Western swing or a jazz tune or something like that. So it's something that totally works, harmonically the same way, goes from one chord to another the same way, but it kind of, it's a new idea in that it really works better in a different context. So I'm not just looking for a million versions that I can use in one place. It's more like, how does what I do with my left and right hand change the potential context of this lick? So that's one idea, just reversing it basically. So that's one idea, but here's another kind of interesting idea. So far we've looked at some 4-note patterns, repeating every 4 notes, which means it happens right on the beat, right? Da, 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 da. Well, we could make this a lot more interesting if instead of 4-note patterns, we used a different number in each repeating pattern. And since we're 3-finger banjo players and we play a lot of forward rolls, we could try just doing a similar idea with just forward rolls, right? And just repeat that. But there's a little bit of a challenge, because here's what happens if I do that. I actually don't make it to C when I meant to. I still want this to be the same length of licks, so I actually have to change other things about it. So let's see what we can add to this to make it a little bit longer so it actually lands where it's supposed to. The beginning is still fine. What I'm hearing is that we're actually skipping a note on the way from G to C. The original, traveling line here is, which sounds great, but we're skipping the B flat on the way. There's technically one more note if we wanted to make it all chromatic, which would not work with these 4-note patterns, but if we're doing a 3-note pattern, then something could work there. That actually works great. So that's got the same continuity moving with this repeating pattern from one place to another. So it doesn't sound random. It really sounds like there's some order and organization with it. But it's certainly different from the original lick. It has even in some ways kind of that like Don Reno all forward roll sound. So it's maybe a little bit less modern sounding, maybe a little bit more traditional without being quite Earl Scruggs. I mean, none of these words really mean anything. It's just what makes me think of where these things could fit. This is some idea that hasn't necessarily been played exactly like that before that I can fit into a space and really speak that language. I don't have to necessarily pigeonhole every idea that I have into every situation. I can kind of decide what's going to work where. And that's something you can kind of just do endlessly, is change the right hand pattern of these licks, and then depending how that changes things, maybe add or subtract notes to make it work, and end up with some really great and similar licks. But there's another thing we can do. There's actually kind of endless things that we can do to change this, but one of the things we can do is play this lick in a different place. And it's not going to be exactly the same lick, but the idea of the lick, what it is that's being achieved. Because what's the important part of this? I think it's that we're going from G to C. Just that is really the biggest sound of the lick. And you can play that couple notes going from G to C a bunch of different places. So we can approximate the same sound of that lick and come up with something new that's going to achieve the same thing, but different places on the fretboard, which is going to be a new sound, which would be interesting, but it might also expand our understanding of the fretboard without really having to learn necessarily anything new per se, just finding what we already know in different places. So what if we did that? What if we wanted to play that same lick or the same idea of that lick in a different place using these important notes? How would we go about doing that? So there aren't any hard, fast rules about how exactly this has to go, but I'm going to try to create some sort of roll pattern, including the notes in a G chord, including these notes traveling from G to C, and just see what works. So a pretty obvious one would be to start here. If I'm starting with G, then I'm gonna start with a G chord that has that at the top, right? Now, think about what happens in our original version of the lick. Nothing changes except we just add a new note. We just go from G to G sharp. Well, what if I come up with a 4-note roll pattern? Then I do the same thing. All I do is I change that G to a G sharp. Kind of a weird sound, but that's the sound we're looking for. It's similar to this. If you're into music theory, then you'll know that that's a diminished chord. It's not super important that you know that or know exactly why that works in this context, because as I said, it's just as valid to say, I took my G chord and I just moved that one note up in the same way this other lick did. That's still music theory, just very different words for it, but that works. So where do we move from there? Well, the next note we're trying to get in our path from G to C would be A. So then we basically need to take our A note, which we know is kind of the melody of this lick, and then find 2 other notes that can go with it that can work with this roll pattern. So again, thinking back to our previous lick, we have the notes in a G7 chord, or most of a G7 chord. So what if we had this note A, and then we try to reach some notes in a G7 chord? Well, we could do B and F. Those are 2 notes, right, in a G7 chord. Maybe that's kind of interesting sound, but let's see how it works in the context. That could work. That's interesting. We'll hold on to that. Maybe we'll see if that works or doesn't work. Another option is to just play any chord within the key of G underneath it. It doesn't have to necessarily be the chord that you're playing over. It's just something that works well with the note A. So in the key of G, thinking of a chord that includes the note A, you could just go A minor. That's kind of a nice sound too. To me, that actually sounds like we're going somewhere new, where this sounds a little bit more like I'm staying in the same place with one moving melody note. Because I keep landing back on that B note. It's not a bad thing, it's just I find it interesting to move forward. And these are choices that I'm making right now, not based on reproducing the sound of this lick necessarily. More, I'm trying to keep that important thread, that melodic line from G to C, and the rest of it is really just whatever I think sounds good. So I'm kind of tricking myself into this creative mode of coming up with new things that I like based on if I like the sound or not. I've learned the lick because I like the lick, right? Everything else from that point on, I'm not learning the same lick, I'm just coming up with something new, and I have to really rely on my ear to decide if I like it or not. If I don't like it, then I'm not gonna play that version of the thing I'm coming up with. If I do like it, that's what I'm gonna keep. So maybe I'll just hold on to this A minor as an in-between. The last note we have before we get to C is B. We could do G7, which has this F here. And by the end we get to C. So let's see what happens if I put all of that together. That sounds pretty cool to me. It's cool for a couple of reasons. One, it gives you more or less the sound of the original lick, but beyond that, it's cool because you can play that in any key because there are no open strings. Nothing wrong with open strings, but it means I could do the same thing if I want to go from G to C. Doing the same thing going from A to D is just the same idea, just starting from A. So now I can do this in any key and I have something I can move around and reuse in a lot of context. That'll be really useful. So anyway, all of that said, this is generally what I'm doing when I learn new ideas from other players and then I want to incorporate that into my playing. It's not so much that I'll sit down with a specific lick and see how many different ways I can use it necessarily. It's more like as I'm working on something, while I'm trying to come up with ideas, I'm pulling from the library of things that I've already learned and kind of retrofitting things so that they work best in the context that I'm trying to use them. And you can't help by kind of stretching the boundaries of what you already know if you're doing that. And while this certainly does not unlock the entire fretboard or tell you everything you need to know about how Scott Vestal plays or how to improvise or anything like that, it is a teeny tiny piece of the puzzle that we were able to get through today. And for me, the plan is to keep working on this idea and maybe work on it tomorrow or find a new idea. And that's just how it goes. You just kick the rock down the road just a little bit more, and you kind of do that forever. So far as I can tell, anyway. So I've had fun working on this. I hope you do too. Check out Patreon if you're looking for the tablature for all of the examples of things that I played in this video. Of course, subscribe to this channel, like this video, all that kind of stuff. But that's going to do it for this video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.